How did I end up here? Lying in your arms, watching city lights and the stars.
So 2 years ago, I put out a video where I talked about Hatsune Miku of Vocaloid fame, giving my thoughts on her as a concept and how she redefined the concept of idols as a whole. Now, why am I talking about her again in what will be the same fashion? Well, to be honest with you, over time I've come to really dislike how that video turned out. I was downright wrong about certain things. I treated Miku as her own individual, not crediting many of the actual artists and producers behind a lot of her music, and, well, it's a video with wars of text. One of the final videos to use wars of text instead of text-to-speech and later voiceovers, actually. So, yeah, for those reasons and more, I've always wanted to remake it. I feel like the cultural impact of Miku and Vocaloid as a whole deserves better coverage, and as someone who is unabashedly a Vocaloid fan, doing the medium such a disservice back in the day is a sin that should remain unpunished. In other words, I'm sorry if any Miku/Vocaloid fans saw that. Hell, I'm sorry for any outsiders that watched it. But aside, I think I can do a much better job this time around. There's going to be a variety of topics I'll be talking about regarding Miku here today. Some I spoke about in my previous Miku vid, but also others that I didn't mention or just didn't go into detail about. From the history of Miku to her cultural impact and more maybe miscellaneous topics, this is how video essays typically work. So, if there's a particular subject you want to see me talk about, you'll be able to find the timestamps in the description or on screen now. It's kind of funny really, after my video game music essay, I didn't expect to be talking about such a thing again so soon. Well, we're not talking about video game music here, we are still talking music, so let's just get on with it, shall we? The legacy of Hatsune Miku. If you were growing up in the late 2000s or early 2010s, there's a high chance that you're aware of what Vocaloid is already, but not everyone has the same path in life, so in case you do already know what it is, even through hearsay or you're a fanatic, I apologise ahead of time for repeating stuff you may already know. However, with that said, for those who are in the dark, allow me to give you a rundown on what Vocaloid is exactly, history and all. Long ago in the distant year of 2000, the year before I was born, a singing voice synthesizer software product was created, then under the name of Daisy in reference to the song Daisy Bell, but for obvious copyright reasons the name was later dropped. It was developed through a joint research project that was led by Kenmochi Hideki, taking place at the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, Spain. Apologies if I butchered that name. The product was then later announced for the first time in 2003 at a German fair known as Musikmesse. Musikmesse is German for music fair, by the way, so just in case you were wondering. At first, the product was not intended to be a commercial one, but after being backed by Yamaha Corporation, well known for their pianos, development of a commercial product began, later released in 2004, coming to be known as Vocaloid. For a brief rundown of what Vocaloid software is, it allows the user to synthesize singing by typing in lyrics and the relevant melody to make a song. It's text-to-speech but with music basically. This works by using synthesizing technology with specially recorded vocals of voice actors or singers. And for clarity, I guess, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a synthesizer is a computerized electronic apparatus for the production and control of sound, as for producing music. Back to the topic at hand. The Vocaloid software contains a number of voice banks. Voice banks contain the voices that can be used in the software. Each voice bank is sold as a singer in a box, which, I don't know about you, but that's kind of funny to me. I don't know why. But anyway, their purpose, obviously, is to act as a sort of replacement for, well, an actual singer. And because of this, they were released under what's called a Moe anthropomorphism. Don't know what that means? Well, don't worry, I had no idea until I looked it up either. But to put it simply, it's where Moe qualities, Moe meaning youthful, innocent, and vulnerable in an ideal way in Japanese culture, are given to non-human beings, concepts, or phenomena. So, in other words I guess, it means the voice banks are designed to be cute, as a way to appeal to otaku culture, which Vocaloid is heavily ingrained, of course. Upon release, there were only 5 Vocaloids, 3 for the English side and 2 for the Japanese side. The 3 English ones were known as Leon, Lola and Miriam, created by Zero G, a sound library company, and the 2 Japanese Vocaloids were Maiko and Kaito, which were made by Yamaha and then later sold by Krypton Future Media. Out of those 5, you may be more familiar with the Japanese Vocaloids, Maiko and Kaito. Lord knows I am. I'd never even heard them mentioned English Vocaloids prior to doing research for this. Obviously, the familiarity of the Japanese ones would be because, well, they were more widely used by the community, which we'll get into later. Since the release of the original Vocaloid software in 2004, there have been 4 more versions released since then, with the most recent version, Vocaloid 5, being released on July 12, 2018, over 3 years ago. It should be mentioned that the further language support was added in Vocaloid 3, including Spanish for the Vocaloids known as Bruno, Clara and Micah, Chinese for the Vocaloids known as Liu, Tiani, Xinhui and Yani, I apologise for butchering those names, and finally Korean for the Vocaloid known as CU. Honestly, you call me an outsider for this, but I wasn't aware that Vocaloid supported other languages beyond just English and Japanese, so it was pretty interesting to find out that it did. You learn something new every day, as they say. Now, I'm not going to go into what makes up the technology and inner workings of the Vocaloid software, because this isn't a deep dive into the particular subject, nor does that type of thing have a place on this channel, and I have like 5 IQ on a good day as is, so I'd rather just not. However, there is one thing regarding the technology that I want to touch upon real quick, and that's how the voice banks work. So as mentioned, the voice banks are essentially digital singers that can be used to sing any written lyrics. This is possible because of what's known as the Singer Library, which is a database of vocal fragments which are sampled from real people, usually singers or voice actors. And to get a little more technical here, for this to be possible, the database must have all possible phonemes, a unit of sound that can distinguish one word from another, of the target language, e.g. Japanese. This also includes diphones, a chain of 2 different phonemes, along with sustained vowels, as well as polyphones, a symbol or sequence of symbols that have more than one phonemic value with more than 2 phonemes, if required. I said I wanted to be brief, but in all fairness, some of that did require a little more information. Either way, I generally thought that was fascinating because, yeah, obviously, how would just a simple sampling of a voice be able to cover every possible lyric that could be written without the many little other things mentioned? With the creation and history of Vocaloid now going over, there isn't too much more to talk about regarding the subject, other than a few additions and or changes that future Vocaloid releases made. There isn't a great deal to talk about here, so this will be brief. Starting with Vocaloid 2, this one based its results on the vocal samples rather than simply analysing the human voice. Oh, and by the way, Vocaloid 2 came with the Hatsune Miku voice bank. We'll touch more on that later, but I just thought I'd drop that here now. For Vocaloid 3, a number of studios updated their existing products for use with this software, along with improved voice samples. For Vocaloid 4, several version 4 Vocaloids were released for it, including popular ones such as Megurine Luka, Kagami Ren, and, of course, Hatsune Miku. And finally, for Vocaloid 5, the only real major change was that it released with vocals, which was previously sold separately. For as much as I would love to continue talking about Vocaloid as a whole, if you read the title of this video at all, then you know exactly why we're here, or rather, who we're here for. Is that right to say? I mean, Miku's not a real person obviously, but it also sounds weird to refer to her as an object by saying what we're here for, so whatever, back to it. We're here to talk about Hatsune Miku, so why don't we delve more into her history and such instead. As I touched upon briefly in the What is the Vocaloid segment prior when talking about the additions and changes each subsequent Vocaloid release made, the Hatsune Miku voice bank was released for the Vocaloid 2 software. Initially released in August of 2007, Miku was the first Japanese Vocaloid to be both developed and distributed by Krypton Future Media, the same company behind other previously mentioned Vocaloids such as Megurine Luka, Kagami Ren, Maiko, and Kaito. Codenamed CV01, logically standing for Character Voice 01, Miku was actually the first member of what's known as the Character Vocal Series, a Hall of Fame of sorts which consists of Krypton's most famous voice banks, and is the successor to their initially unnamed Vocaloid series, which at the time only consisted of Maiko and Kaito. Overall, Miku was the 7th Vocaloid to be released and the 2nd to be released for Vocaloid 2, the first being Sweet Anne, an English Vocaloid, over 2 months prior. And fun fact, Miku's voice is provided by the Japanese voice actress Saki Fujita, who is also the voice actress for a large number of anime characters, including Ritsu from an Assassination Classroom, and Ymir from Attack on Titan. I believe I brought up her role in AOT in my original Miku video, but at the time I hadn't seen through the show, but now that I have, and in fact I just found out she played a fairly major character in my favourite anime, Assassination Classroom, in doing further research, I think that's so cool. She's got quite the impressive portfolio. Back to Hatsune Miku though, it should be mentioned that in Vocaloid 3 she got an upgrade for the software which also included an English vocal release, and then Vocaloid 4, my apologies, she received an update for both her Japanese and English voice banks in August of 2016, along with a Mandarin Chinese voice bank later in September of 2017. Moving on to her design now, as mentioned in the segment prior, Vocaloids began releasing under a Moe anthropomorphism after a certain point, and Miku was kind of the catalyst for this. According to the Vocaloid lore, yeah, we'll go with that. Miku is a 16-year-old girl who is an android diva in the near future world where songs are lost, which, that's kind of metal, I love it. metal. It's funny because she's an android. Anyway, the most iconic aspect about her design has to be her long turquoise twin tails, which are consistent throughout all of her official key art and music. And for one last tidbit about her character, her name means the first sound from the future. And if you don't think that's cool, then I really don't know what to say. They really didn't have to go so hard for it, but they did anyway. I want to delve a little more into the origin of Miku now, specifically her design. Miku's illustrator is Kai, a Japanese cartoonist and illustrator who was known for his watercolor-like moe style of drawing. In 2007, Krypton personally asked him to draw an illustration for their first character vocal series product, this product, of course, being Hatsune Miku. He was given detailed concepts and guidance, but with what he was given, he found it hard to bring to life what Krypton was requesting. A singing computer, essentially. Apparently, it took him over a month to complete the request, which, I don't know about you, all things considered, that doesn't seem too bad. But anyway, supposedly, Miku was going to have a very different hairstyle. What this would have been, I can't find anything on, but nevertheless, after Kai tried out pigtails for her design, the pigtails that are now iconic to Miku, he thought they would be more fitting, and that was that. There's also the matter of the digital looking motif that appears on both Miku's skirt and boots, and this is based on the colours of the synthesizer program itself, black along with accents of turquoise and red, though the red accents only appear on later versions of the illustrations. Interestingly enough, part of her design is actually based on certain Yamaha keyboards, specifically the DX100 and DX7, of which you can see on her left arm in every version of her illustrations. And as for the weird little red squares around her pigtails, which probably serve as hairbands, they are a type of futuristic ribbon made from material that floats in place. What this material is, or is supposed to be, is anyone's guess. But they look cool, so I'm not complaining about being in the dark about whatever they are. They're also consistent throughout her designs. So now that I've gone over Miku's origins and a little bit more about her, I want to talk about her history, while also covering subjects such as her cultural impact. Sound good? Well, let's get to it. To start off with here, I want to talk about her marketing. There's a lot here, surprisingly, so if this is not your thing, either just bear with me or skip to the timestamp you see on screen here now, to where I'll be talking about the many different iterations of her voice message. With that said, let's begin. When it comes to Miku's initial marketing, it was no different to how previous Vocaloid voice facts were marketed. A large portion of the marketing was centered around a magazine known as DTM magazine, a magazine focusing on DTM musicians, DTM meaning desktop music, a way of playing music that uses a PC, an electronic instrument, and a MIDI. It should be noted that Miku and Kaito frequented this magazine before her. Upon the inclusion of a CD with Miku's vocals in the November 2007 issue of the magazine, causing it to sell out, it was then noted while Hatsune Miku was on pre-order that Miku and Kaito would no longer be receiving updates, and instead, Miku would be taking over their roles going forward. Hatsune Miku, the Grim Reaper of Vocaloid, who would have guessed? At the time of her release, in 2007, the amateur and otaku markets were extremely niche ones and hadn't fully formed yet, so Miku was marketed towards more professional producers instead. However, shortly after, Miku ended up achieving substantial commercial success, the likes of which Krypton hadn't seen prior to her release. Capitalizing on the fact, Krypton offered multiple arrays of support, including technical support, guidebooks, and magazine support, which was solely focused on her vocals. And as you can guess, a majority of the mass marketing came in response to her success, with her name still being the forefront of marketing to this day for Krypton, despite future additions to the character vocal series. And to put this in perspective, according to the Nomura Research Institute in March of 2012, they estimated that all the sales of Hatsune Miku branded merchandise and goods totaled around 10 billion yen, or $90,372,610 in today's money. And that's wild. If that metric isn't enough to give you an idea of the cultural impact Miku's had, well, I guess I'm going to have to keep trying to convince you when we're actually getting to talking about her cultural impact a little later on. Starting in 2011, Krypton began to focus on marketing to the US, and on May 7th of that year, Amazon in the US put a preview of Supercell's hit song, and the song is most synonymous for Miku, The World Is Mine, as a preview as a single. And when it eventually went on sale, the song reached number 7 in the top 10 world singles list on iTunes in just its first week. For something that used to be so niche, that's unprecedented. For the marketing side of things, the song was titled The World Is Mine, featuring Hatsune Miku. It can be argued that this song was the boom that would form the Vocaloid community as we know it today, but I don't believe it's my place to throw out such claims as that, so I'll stop while I'm ahead. But when it comes to their target audience, Krypton chose to aim for the internet fanbase. Word spreads quickly on the internet, after all, so this was, of course, a good decision. Interestingly, prior to marketing to US and Japan, Miku was always marketed as a virtual instrument, and so when it came came to the decision and wanted to market Miku as a virtual singer in the US, Krypton actually consulted the Japanese fanbase over this to see if it was acceptable, which they obviously got the green light on. How often do you hear companies consulting a fanbase to see if a change is acceptable or not? Not often, I imagine, especially so nowadays. Another interesting factoid that I don't believe gets much attention. Following the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan, Miku was actually chosen as the character to help represent the country. The reason behind this decision was because of how commonplace her image was with younger people, already being featured in textbooks and the influence of music up to that point, which was something the Minister of Education for Japan at the time was well aware of. And just imagine that, something that was created no more than 4 years prior becoming the image that would represent Japan in the wake of such a tragic disaster. That's incredible. Skipping ahead all the way to this year, Krypton announced a collaboration with the art exhibition known as Hatsune Miku Chronicle for an event titled Hatsune Miku Chronicle X Piaku, What If You Draw Hatsune Miku Software Package Illustration Recruitment. A bit wordy, I will admit, but nevertheless, the intention behind it is to have fans draw their own original character, but name it Hatsune Miku. Further guidance includes keeping the basic profile, image, and colour palette used in her initial 2007 artwork. And as a huge bonus, the winning illustration will get turned into a special software package, so yeah, that's quite the incentive. There was also a new Hatsune Miku Nendoroid figure announced, which is actually based on her original concept design, since becoming known as Hatsune Miku if Fur. Nendoroids aren't really my cup of tea, but I can see why people like them, and hey, one based around her original concept design is a pretty good reason to pick it up, I won't lie. And that's going to do it for her marketing, so now I'm going to move on to talking about her many different voice bank iterations. Don't worry though, I'm going to give you a break from my voice for a moment, you're welcome HP. And instead I'm going to put the summary of what each voice bank is on screen for, let's say around 8 seconds. So pause if you want to read any of them, of course. Past that, I think it's time we finally talk about Miku's music. Well, rather than the music she features in, believe it or so, I'm really excited to talk about the music again. Can you tell I'm slurring my words? Because, well, I love her music, unapologetically so. I've got interests, and this video is just another excuse for me to talk about them, so no more stalling. Let's begin. The most obvious place to start with the music side of Hatsune Miku is her most well-known song, The World Is Mine. As mentioned earlier, this was a collaboration, I guess, between the artist known as Ryo and Hatsune Miku, released in 2008. As the title suggests, the song is about a spoiled girl who believes herself to be a princess that the world revolves around, hence, the world is mine. And this song is interesting because it serves as a sort of character discrepancy for Miku, portraying her as a short-tempered and fickle, contrasting with her usual meek and sweet-tempered attitude that she's usually portrayed as having. However, for as consistent as her usually portrayed attitude is, it isn't a constant, so it's kind of a waste of time for me to be pointing that out. But anyway, given its overwhelming popularity, it's since entered the Vocaloid Hall of Legends, which is a step up from the Vocaloid Hall of Fame, the former being a term used for Vocaloid videos that have surpassed 1 million views. It is also known as a Vocaloid Myth, a term used for videos that have surpassed 10 million views, so yep, it's certainly quite a beast in terms of popularity, also making it Supercell's most notable song by a long shot. To clarify something real quick, something I just found out, any Vocaloid video that has surpassed 100,000 views on YouTube, they just aren't apparently not eligible for such a thing. as entering the Vocaloid Hall of Fame because the YouTube site hasn't adopted these established conventions for whatever reason. I don't know, it's kind of confusing. Where this applies though is the video sharing site Nico. I just wanted to make that clear. So anyway, regarding my own thoughts on The World Is Mine, I do think it's definitely a really good piece and holds up really well even 30 years later. But I don't at all consider it one of my favourites. I think that's probably because of the character discrepancy thing I mentioned. Characterization is very important to me at the end of the day. Now, there are definitely a few entries later on here that will contradict my statement there, but even with the characterization thing aside, The World Is Mine is not one I really find myself coming back to. It is a good listen for whenever I do come back to it, but it's not something I can have on repeat constantly, you know. If this is one of your favourites, either your absolute favourite, then good on you. I'm genuinely glad you can like it so much and find something in it that I can't. But again, I do like the song, I just don't love it. My apologies. I'm gonna sound like a real clown here for this next one, but considering all that I just said, next up we have Roland Girl. Created by the artist known as Wowalka, my apologies if I butchered that name, released in 2010, it's quite a historically significant one, hitting number 2 position in the weekly Vocaloid ranking in the week of its debut, and it hit 1 million views on June 28th of the same year. Regarding its background, here's a bit of a content warning. This one has themes of suicide, so if you're sensitive to such a thing, then skip to the timestamp you can see on screen here. I'll give you a few seconds. For reference, in case you struggle with this type of thing, I put various helpline numbers in the description below. If not, please, at least talk to someone, anyone. Despite what you may think, the world needs you. Right, so despite the lyrics of the song being vague, a very common interpretation of the song is that the girl, Miku, is getting bullied, is being shunned, or is failing constantly, leading her to commit suicide. It's a really dark portrayal of Hatsune Miku and is, again, a character discrepancy, but I'm willing to let that complaint slide in this case because the song is just, I don't know if beautiful would be the right word to use here, it's poignant. The use of the piano in the song is just really good. The piano is probably my favourite instrument and is often used to convey more negative or heavier emotions, so it's obviously fitting for the subject matter. I also want to bring up how the PV of the song has a more positive conclusion, with Miku being in the arms of this unknown guy and colour being restored to her life. It's a creative liberty, having things turn out okay in the end, but it's one I appreciate because it shows that there is a way out of the darkness. This is an instance of the community taking stuff into their own hands and improving it, and for that, I love this particular interpretation. Life may not be full of happy endings, but as cynical and sometimes pessimistic as I can be, I don't believe it always has to be bad. Moving on to a song that's a little more upbeat, well, only in terms of the music, Senbon Zakura, or Thousand Cherry Blossoms, is by Kurosa P, my apologies if I butchered their name, an artist who has made waves in the Vocaloid community, being one of the more popular artists. It is also the second song I'm talking about here to have entered the Vocaloid Hall of Myths. I did talk about this one in the original Miku vid, but not in a lot of detail and only went off surface information, so that's partly why I'm talking about it again here. I stated that Senbon Zakura was only upbeat in terms of the music track. That's because in terms of its background, the song is about the westernization of Japan, which took place during the Meiji Restoration, which, for a brief history lesson, was a political event that restored practical imperial rule to Japan in 1868 under Emperor Meiji. The lyrics also contain mentions of guillotines and ICBMs, so yeah, surprisingly dark when you look more into it. I feel incredibly stupid for just saying how I liked it, because Japan's cool and it has aspects of the culture that I like in the previous Miku vids, just that. Well, either way, Senbon Zakura is one of my favourites simply because of how much of a joy it is to listen to, despite the dark undertones, purely because of the upbeat oriental track. So the 3 songs I've covered so far are more popular pieces of Miku's that I felt needed to be mentioned, but these next 3 are ones that I've chosen myself. Well, you can argue that I've chosen all of these myself, considering I'm the only one who makes these videos, but shut up. Really? God's sake, my alarm's going off. Anyhow, next up we have 39 by Sasakura UK. 39 was released to celebrate Miku's 5th birthday in 2012. And as for the background, it's just about Miku thanking all of her listeners over the years, her users, and just a general Vocaloid fanbase for sticking with her for so long. It's just such a sweet, genuine piece that it feels like Miku's speaking directly to us. The general consensus is that Miku has always included her fans. She's never strayed away from them, and that's perfectly captured in 39. It's a song that really hits the feels, but in a good way. Oh, and if you're wondering why it's just called 39? Well, that's because in Japanese, 39 can be read as Miku and also thank you. So that's really nice. I may have become familiar with 39 through the Magical Variety 2016 version, which is fantastic as well, but the original is just as good, maybe even a little better because of how positively emotional it is. Side note, this might actually be a completely different piece. My apologies if I'm incorrect on that basis. Just thought I'd add that in here. Now we move on to Odds and Ends. This is my favourite Hatsune Miku song. Released in August of 2012, made by Rio Supercell, it's one that I will never get bored listening to, no matter how many times I have it on repeat. For the background, it has striking parallels to Ryo's story as a composer and Vocaloid producer. The lyrics describe that of someone who remains unrecognised, but with the help of Hatsune Miku, they overcome so many hurdles and barriers, and because of that, the song has this kind of bittersweet feeling to it. Where would he be without Miku? It's such an amazing piece. The instrumentation is fantastic, the emotion trying to be conveyed is on point, the lyrics that Miku sings hit you in the feels, and the variation of tempo is just perfect for the story being told. Not to mention the music video that accompanies the song, released in 2013, that tells the story but in a visual sense. It's just so good. It really deserves to be talked about more, honestly. And finally, we have Hibikase. Hibikase, or Resonate, was released in September 2014, and it was made by Gig P, another very popular creator in the community. Hibikase tells a rather melancholy story, contrasting the otherwise high-energy electric music. Miku waits until midnight for a nightly routine, where she gets to perform with the user on the other side of the screen. However, she's become aware of her virtual existence, now being sentient. She then yearns for that moment where she gets to perform, because it's the closest thing to intimacy she can get with the one she loves. Admittedly, the scenario reminds me a lot of DDLC, where all Monica wants is to be with the one she loves, but can't. Except, you know, Miku doesn't, like, kill off other characters or anything to get there. But yeah, it kind of pulls on your heartstrings a little, which is so weird for something that sounds so good musically, but I guess in a way, you can start to interpret the music as befitting of her struggle once you let the lyrics sink in. It's pretty clever that way and teaches you not to take things at face value, or undermine certain aspects in favour of others. And with that, we're done with talking about the music side of things. Sure, only talking about 6 songs doesn't even scratch the surface, but if you think I'm going to sit here and talk about the 100,000 plus songs she's featured in, you're insane. But anyway, for our final part of this journey with Hatsune Miku, why don't we delve into her cultural impact. When it comes to Miku's rise to fame, a little website by the name of Nico Nico Douga played a vital part in that. Soon after Miku's release for Vocaloid 2, users of Nico Nico Douga began posting content that was created using their voice bank. And boy am I glad I don't have to say Nico Nico Douga again, because otherwise I'm going to break someone's Nico Nico kneecaps! Anyway, according to Krypton themselves, a video featuring her chibi version known as Hatsune Miku, singing and dancing to Even Polka while spinning a spring onion, though it's actually just a leak, somehow demonstrated the potential of the Vocaloid software in different types of content creation, so quite the humble beginnings really. And as Miku became more popular and her level of recognisability grew, Nico Nico Douga, goddammit, became a thriving place for collaborative content creation. 2 years later, in September 2009, 3 figures based on the design of Miku's chibi variant, Hatsune Miku, were launched into space in a rocket from the American state of Nevada's Black Rock Desert. Unfortunately though, it didn't quite get to space. But maybe that's a good thing, because I don't know how I'd feel about 3 chibi Mikus looking down upon me from the great beyond. It's quite a terrifying thought actually. In another effort to get Miku into space, in November 2009, a petition was created to get a custom-made Hatsune Miku plate made for the Japanese Venus spacecraft explorer Akatsuki, my apologies, of which would serve as a sort of balancing weight for the spacecraft. A month later, on December 22nd, the petition exceeded the required 10,000 signatures, and following a number of delays on the Akatsuki project, it's going off again. What the fuck? On May 21st, 2010, the spacecraft launched with 3 plates depicting Hatsune Miku and Hatsune Miku in several monochrome images, along with the miniature letters of the messages from the petition form itself etched into the plates. That's goddamn incredible, I'm not gonna lie. If by chance you ever heard of the character Blackrock Shooter, you may have noticed similarities between her design and Miku's. That's because she greatly influenced BRS's design, obviously. The character was made famous thanks to a song by the same name. Ryu, who was inspired to create the song after seeing the original character illustration way back in 2007, coincidentally the same year Miku was released, Miku was used for the vocals, and since then, BOS has received merchandise, an OVA, 3 manga series, a televised anime series that originally ended in 2012, and 3 video games. To say that Miku made Black Rock Shooter would be an understatement. And speaking of making stuff, did you know that Hatsune Miku also made Minecraft and wrote Harry Potter? Yeah, I'm serious, look it up. Okay, well that's not entirely accurate. You see, following controversial tweets that were critical of transgender people from both Marcus Besson, the creator of Minecraft, and J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, the Hatsune Miku parody account known as Miku Miku eBooks tweeted, "I created Minecraft," and it's just become a thing ever since where Miku is credited as the creator of something if the original creator has some kind of controversial head-ass take. Oh, well, while I'm on the subject, trans rights. From those few examples alone, you now probably have a good idea on the impact Hatsune Miku has had in the 14 years since their release. And you know, that's not to mention the community that has spawned around her. Fan art, cosplays, animation, and of course, music. Hatsune Miku is a very beloved character, and while some in the Vocaloid community may feel like she's undeserving of her success, it's hard to undermine the fact. I became a fan of Hatsune Miku a few years back. I don't think I'm ever going to stop being one, for as corny as that sounds. I really do hope that this video has done a much better service to Miku and Vocaloid as a whole compared to my previous one. Though that's probably not hard to do in reality. As I rarely talk about anything Vocaloid related, the last time I did so being, well, that first Hatsune Miku vid over 2 years ago, so I'm happy that I finally got to it again. And if you've gotten this far, I hope you enjoyed me talking about a slightly more niche passion of mine. I just kinda wish I knew when to stop sometimes, you know? It would make my life so much easier if I had less to do. Maybe I'll learn someday. Oh, hopefully.